No one in the emergency room noticed the silence at first. They were too busy with screaming monitors, rushed footsteps, and the sharp smell of antiseptic cutting through the air. Too busy mocking the quiet new nurse who kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and moved like she was trying not to be seen. Then the windows began to vibrate. A low, heavy thudding rolled across the hospital roof. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Conversations died mid-sentence. Stretchers stopped moving. Somewhere above them, a military helicopter descended toward the helipad, its blades slicing through the night like a warning. Security radios crackled. Administrators froze, and over an open channel a calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "We've touched down. We're here for our trauma specialist." In that moment, the ER didn't just hold its breath. It realized it had made a terrible mistake. Before the story begins, tell us, where are you watching from and what's your local time right now? If you're drawn to stories where silence hides strength and justice arrives without shouting, tap subscribe and stay with us. Emily Carter arrived at St. Anne's Medical Center at 6:12 p.m. 12 minutes early for a shift no one seemed particularly excited to give her. The ER entrance glowed harsh white against the gathering dusk, automatic doors hissing open as she stepped inside. She paused just long enough to adjust the strap of her worn canvas bag on her shoulder, eyes lifting instinctively to scan the room not with curiosity, but with quiet assessment. The habit was old, automatic. She noted exits, crowd density, the rhythm of movement. Then she lowered her gaze and walked in like any other new nurse, hoping not to stand out. She was small, almost forgettable at first glance. Brown hair pulled back into a tight regulation bun. Scrubs, a shade too faded to be new. No jewelry, no makeup beyond what was necessary to look awake. Her badge read Emily Carter RN, the letters clean and unadorned. At the charge nurse's desk, Linda Morales barely looked up. "You're the new hire?" Linda asked, fingers still flying across the keyboard. "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied. Linda glanced at her once, eyes flicking over Emily's posture too straight for someone fresh out of orientation, and then back to the screen. "Locker rooms down the hall. You're assigned to Trauma Bay C tonight. Shadow only. Don't freelance." "Understood." That single word earned Emily a brief, puzzled look. Most new nurses nodded too eagerly, talked too much, tried to prove they belonged. Emily simply accepted instructions like they were orders already weighed and understood. As she walked away, a pair of nurses leaned toward each other behind the desk. "She looks like she's about to apologize for existing," one of them muttered. "Give her a week," the other replied. "ER eats quiet ones alive." Emily didn't react. If she heard them, it didn't show. Her footsteps were light, efficient, never rushing, never lagging. When she reached the locker room, she changed quickly. Movements precise, folding her clothes into clean lines before stowing them away. She took one steady breath before stepping back into the noise. Trauma Bay C sat at the edge of the ER, close enough to hear everything, far enough to be overlooked. Emily was assigned to assist where needed, fetch supplies, restock carts, clean gurneys. The kind of work that kept her moving but invisible. Doctor Mark Reynolds noticed her only because she was in his way. "Hey, nurse," he snapped, as she reached for a blood pressure cuff. "I need that." Emily handed it to him without hesitation. Cuffs calibrated, but the valve sticks if you release too fast. Reynolds paused, surprised despite himself. Then he scoffed. "I'll manage." He turned away, dismissing her with a wave, already barking orders at a resident. Emily stepped back, eyes flicking to the patient's monitor. Heart rate irregular, oxygen saturation dipping. Nothing dramatic yet, but trending the wrong direction. She said nothing. Across the bay, another nurse struggled to start an IV on a combative patient. Emily appeared at her side without announcement, gently adjusting the angle of the needle. "Try 2 degrees lower," she murmured. The IV slid in smoothly. The nurse blinked. "Oh, thanks." Emily nodded once and moved on. By 7:30 p.m., the ER was filling fast. Flu season had arrived early, and the waiting room was a sea of coughing bodies and frayed tempers. Overhead storm clouds rolled in dark and heavy, rattling the windows with distant thunder. Linda watched the board with growing irritation. "Where's Reynolds?" she demanded. "Trauma Bay." Someone answered, arguing with radiology. Linda exhaled sharply. "Of course he is." Emily passed by with a supply cart just as Linda rubbed her temples. Without being asked, she reached up and adjusted the whiteboard, updating patient status, moving names to reflect changing priorities. Linda froze. "Who told you to do that?" Emily looked at her, calm, unflinching. "No one. But room 12's vitals are trending unstable. If they crash, we'll lose time moving them." There was no challenge in her tone, no defensiveness, just information. For a moment, Linda stared at her, torn between annoyance and something uncomfortably close to respect. "Fine," Linda said finally. "But don't make a habit of it." "Yes, ma'am." The words came easily, but Emily's eyes lingered on the board a half-second longer than necessary, calculating. The first ambulance siren cut through the air at 8:03 p.m. Then another, and another. The radio crackled at the charge desk. Multiple vehicle collision on I-87, possible tanker involvement, unknown casualties. The ER shifted instantly. Voices sharpened. Stretchers rolled. A familiar, dangerous energy filled the space, the calm before impact. Reynolds emerged from trauma bay, her irritation wiped clean by adrenaline. "How bad enough," Linda replied. "We're about to earn our paychecks." Emily stood near the supply racks, hands still, eyes lifted to the radio as if listening for something beneath the words. She had heard tones like that before, not on civilian radios but over encrypted channels with lives balanced on seconds. The first victims arrived within minutes. Blood, broken glass, the metallic smell of fuel clinging to their clothes. Emily moved where she was told, anticipating needs before orders were spoken. She had gloves ready before anyone asked. She steadied gurneys with a grip stronger than her frame suggested. Reynolds noticed again. "You, Emily, right," he said sharply. "Get me another saline bag. Now." She was already handing it to him. His eyes narrowed. "You been working trauma long, some," she replied. "How much is—" "Some." Emily met his gaze for the first time fully. Her eyes were steady, measured. "Enough," he snorted. "Everyone says that." He turned back to his patient, dismissing her again. As more casualties flooded in, the storm outside broke fully. Rain hammered the roof, thunder cracking close enough to shake ceiling tiles. The power flickered once, then steadied. Emily felt it then, a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. This was escalating too fast. The incoming reports were changing. Words like secondary explosion and unconfirmed hazardous materials slipped into the radio chatter. Paramedics shouted conflicting information, the kind of chaos that turns small mistakes into body counts. She watched Reynolds intubate a patient whose blood pressure was dropping faster than he realized. Watched a resident misread a scan. Watched a nurse reach for the wrong medication. Emily opened her mouth, then she closed it. She had learned long ago when speaking too soon only made things worse. But as another siren wailed closer, louder, she felt the familiar weight of a choice settling on her shoulders. Stay invisible, or step forward. And above the storm, beneath the chaos, something else began to hum, low and distant like thunder that didn't belong to the sky. By 9:15 p.m., Street, Anne's emergency room no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a proving ground. Stretchers lined the hallway's IV poles, rattling as staff hurried past one another in tightly choreographed chaos. Voices overlapped orders, questions, half-finished sentences swallowed by alarms. The air was thick with antiseptic sweat, and something sharper, fear carefully disguised as urgency. Emily Carter moved through it all like a shadow with purpose. She didn't rush. She never hesitated. She seemed to know where she was needed a moment before the need became obvious. Another pair of gloves here, suction tubing there. A quiet hand steadying a patient whose eyes were already glazing over. No one assigned her these tasks. She simply did them, slipping between roles without challenging anyone's authority. That, ironically, made her invisible. "Who's that nurse?" a resident muttered as Emily passed behind him, silently adjusting a monitor he hadn't noticed was malfunctioning. "No idea," another replied. "New, I think. Well, she needs to stay in her lane." The words followed Emily down the corridor like a verdict already decided. At Trauma Bay, a doctor, Mark Reynolds, was in his element, or at least he believed he was. His voice cut cleanly through the noise, confident, commanding, tinged with impatience. "BP's holding. Prep for CT. Let's move. The patient groaned weakly as they were transferred, blood soaking through the bandages faster than expected. Emily noticed the slight tremor in the gurney wheels, one loose bolt barely visible. She tightened it with a tool from her pocket before anyone else saw the wobble. Reynolds didn't notice. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead, or so he thought. Emily's eyes flicked to the vitals again. Heart rate climbing, pressure dropping in uneven pulses. The pattern was wrong. Subtle but wrong in a way she recognized with uncomfortable clarity. She leaned toward the nurse beside her. Has anyone checked for internal bleeding below the diaphragm? The nurse frowned. CT's next. That'll be too late. The nurse bristled. Doctor, Reynolds is handling it. Emily nodded and stepped back. She had said her piece. The resident pushed the gurney forward. 30 seconds later, the monitor screamed. Damn it, Reynolds snapped as the patient crashed. Code blue. The hallway erupted. Hands flew. Equipment slammed into place. The rhythm of CPR filled the air, brutal, unforgiving. Emily was already at the head of the bed, bagging oxygen with perfect timing, her movements so efficient they bordered on mechanical. Reynolds glanced up, irritation flaring, then hesitated. Who showed you that technique? He demanded between compressions. Emily didn't look at him. It's standard. No, it isn't, he shot back. She met his eyes briefly. It should be. The words hung there, too calm to be defiant, too precise to ignore. The patient stabilized barely. Reynolds straightened, sweat streaking his brow. He exhaled hard, then shook his head. Lucky catch, he said to no one in particular. Emily stepped away, already moving to the next task. Across the ER, the social dynamics hardened. She's getting bold, one nurse whispered. More like she thinks she knows better than the doctors, another replied. Hate that. Emily felt the shift without needing to hear it. The subtle narrowing of eyes, the way conversation stopped when she approached. The unspoken question floating through the air. Who does she think she is? If she noticed, she didn't show it. Linda Morales watched from the charge desk, arms crossed, jaw tight. She'd been in this ER for 18 years. She knew confidence when she saw it, and she knew when it crossed into something else. Emily Carter wasn't acting like a new nurse. She was acting like someone used to command but refusing to claim it. The radio crackled again. Update on I-87 incident. Possible secondary device. Fire department requesting hazmat support. Expect delayed transports. Linda swore under her breath. This night just keeps getting better. Thunder boomed overhead, close enough to rattle light fixtures. Rain hammered the glass with relentless force. Outside, somewhere beyond the roof, wind howled like a warning siren of its own. Emily paused near the supply racks, eyes lifting not to the ceiling but beyond it, as if measuring something unseen. She checked her watch. Not the time, something else. A memory surfaced, uninvited rotor wash flattening grass. Red lights cutting through smoke. Voices in her ear counting down seconds she couldn't afford to waste. She swallowed and pushed it away. Emily, Linda called sharply. You're on cleanup in Bay C. Now. Yes, ma'am. In Bay C, a young man lay unconscious, blood seeping through a hastily wrapped bandage at his side. A resident stood nearby, charting hurried notes. Vitals? Emily asked quietly. Stable enough, the resident replied without looking up. Emily checked. Anyway, her brow creased almost imperceptibly. His respirations are shallow, she said, and his abdomen's rigid. The resident sighed. Look, I appreciate the concern, but he's bleeding internally, Emily said. Slow. If you wait, he'll arrest. The resident finally looked at her, irritation flaring. Are you diagnosing now? Emily held his gaze. I'm observing. Before he could respond, the monitor beeped once, then stuttered. The resident swore and lunged for the bed. Get Reynolds. Emily was already moving, applying pressure, elevating the legs, calling out vitals in a steady voice that cut through the panic. Reynolds arrived seconds later, scanning the scene. What happened? Emily spoke before the resident could. Suspected splenic rupture. He needs surgery. Now. Reynolds stared at her. The room seemed to shrink around them. That's my call, he said coldly. Emily didn't back down. Then make it. The monitor screamed again, louder this time. Reynolds cursed and turned. All prep. Move. As they rushed the patient out, Reynolds shot Emily a look, not gratitude, not anger, but something unsettled. A crack in certainty he didn't want to examine. Linda watched the exchange from the doorway, unease knotting in her stomach. This wasn't just competence. This was experience. And experience like that didn't come from textbooks or orientations. It came from places most people never saw and never wanted to. As the storm raged outside, a new sound threaded faintly through the chaos. Low, rhythmic, almost mistaken for thunder. Almost. Emily heard it immediately. Her spine stiffened. She didn't look up. Not yet. By the time the clock above the trauma board ticked past 1002 p.m., the emergency room had crossed a threshold no one officially acknowledged. This was no longer controlled chaos. This was erosion. The second wave of patients arrived without warning. Pickup trucks and police cruisers instead of ambulances, their back seats soaked in blood, doors thrown open by people whose hands shook too badly to help. The highway incident had fractured outward, sending injuries in unpredictable bursts rather than orderly lines. Every protocol the ER relied on assumed predictability. Tonight offered none. Where the hell is radiology? Dr. Reynolds snapped as another gurney slammed into place. Backed up a tech yelled, "CT's down to one scanner." "Of course it is," Reynolds muttered. Emily stood near the foot of Trauma Bay B, gloved hands folded loosely in front of her eyes, moving, not darting, never darting, but scanning. She absorbed the scene in layers, blood loss patterns, skin tone changes, breathing irregularities. She didn't need to touch a monitor to know when something was wrong. She felt it. A teenage girl cried softly as a nurse cut away her jacket. Her vitals looked acceptable barely, but her pupils were uneven. Emily leaned closer. "Has she been vomiting?" The nurse hesitated. "I don't think so." Emily's gaze shifted to the girl's hands. "She has." She wiped it off before coming in. The nurse followed her eyes, then stiffened. "I'll get the doctor." Reynolds arrived seconds later, already irritated. "What now? Possible head injury," Emily said. "She needs neuro." Reynolds glanced at the chart. She walked in. "She's talking. We have 3 criticals waiting for beds. She won't be talking much longer." Reynolds straightened slowly. "You're out of line." Emily didn't flinch. "I'm right." The words landed like a challenge, even though they weren't meant to be. Reynolds stared at her jaw tightening. "Get out of my bay." The nurse beside Emily stiffened, eyes wide. Emily simply nodded. "Yes, sir." She stepped back, retreating into the flow of bodies and noise. Behind her, the girl's breathing hitched just once. Emily kept walking. 30 seconds later, the scream cut through the ER. The girl seized violently, her body arching off the bed. Chaos erupted, shouts, alarms, the unmistakable sound of fear breaking through professionalism. "Get me Ativan," Reynolds shouted. Emily was already there, syringe in hand, placing it into his grasp before he finished the word. He froze. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, then recognition sharpened by dread. The seizure stopped. Barely. As the girl was rushed toward imaging, Reynolds stepped back, chest heaving. He scrubbed a hand through his hair and stared at Emily like she'd pulled a secret from his mind. "You should have pushed harder," he said quietly. Emily's voice was steady. "You wouldn't have listened." He didn't argue. Around them, the ER buzzed with low, angry energy. Nurses whispered. Residents avoided Emily's eyes. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. If she knows so much, why isn't she saying more? Because saying more came at a cost. Emily knew that better than anyone. At the charge desk, Linda Morales watched the scene unfold with growing unease. She'd seen plenty of talented nurses. She'd seen arrogance too. But Emily Carter wasn't either. She was restrained in a way that felt trained. Linda leaned toward a clerk. "Pull her file." The clerk frowned. "HR's system is lagging. Try anyway." Minutes passed. The file loaded slowly, line by line. Linda scanned it once. Then again. "Where's the rest?" she muttered. The clerk shrugged. "That's all there is. No prior hospitals listed. No long employment history. Certifications oddly broad but non-specific. Gaps where there shouldn't be any." Linda's stomach tightened. In Trauma Bay D, a man in his 40s gasped for air, his chest rising unevenly. Blood pressure tanking. The resident assigned to him hesitated, flipping through mental checklists that refused to align with what he was seeing. Emily stepped closer. He's going to crash. I know that the resident snapped. He's got a tension pneumothorax. No, his breath sounds are delayed because the lungs already collapsed. The resident hesitated. Too long. Emily moved. She grabbed a needle decompression kit from the wall, snapping it open with practiced speed. The resident stared in horror. What are you doing? You can't, Emily. Drove the needle in at the exact angle, exact depth. Air hissed out violently. The man sucked in a breath so deep it sounded like life snapping back into place. The entire bay went silent. Reynolds appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Who authorized that? Emily looked up, needle still steady in her hand. No one. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Reynolds exhaled sharply and waved a hand. Secure it. Prep chest tube. Emily complied immediately, stepping back as if she hadn't just saved a life with a decision most nurses wouldn't dare make. The resident stared at her like he'd just watched a ghost perform surgery. Word spread fast after that. Not praise, suspicion. She's reckless. She's dangerous. She thinks she's special. Emily heard none of it directly. She felt it in the way conversations shifted when she approached, the way instructions became curt, clipped, defensive. She didn't push back. She never had. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain lashed sideways now, thunder cracking so close it felt personal. Somewhere above the roof, a different sound layered beneath it, steady, mechanical, rhythmic. This time, others heard it too. Is that? A nurse murmured, glancing upward. No way, another replied. Too low. The lights flickered again. Emily paused, mid-step, breath catching just slightly. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the inside pocket of her scrub top where nothing was supposed to be. She closed her eyes for half a second. Not now. A security guard jogged past, radio pressed to his ear. Admin wants a status update. Something about air traffic. Linda's head snapped up. What kind of air traffic? Unscheduled, the guard replied. Military, I think. The word rippled through the ER like an electric shock. Military. This is a hospital, not a base. They can't just land here. Emily felt the room tilt, not physically but internally, as if gravity had shifted. She knew that sound. She'd known it in deserts, in jungles, on nights when survival depended on precision and silence. The helicopter wasn't coming for patients. It was coming for someone who didn't officially exist anymore. Reynolds approached Emily slowly, his earlier arrogance stripped down to something raw. You hear that? He asked. Yes, she said. His eyes searched her face. You nervous? Emily met his gaze, calm as ever. No, she replied. She was resigned. Above them, the thudding grew louder, closer, impossible to ignore now. And for the first time since stepping into street, Anne's that evening, Emily Carter wondered not if she could stay invisible, but whether she was about to lose that choice forever. The helicopter didn't land. Not yet. Instead, it circled slow, deliberate, patient, its rotors beating the air above Street Anne's like a countdown no one had agreed to start. The sound seeped through the ceiling, through bone, and thought impossible to ignore. Inside the ER, nerves frayed. Security says FAA clearance is pending, Linda announced from the charge desk, her voice tight. No one's allowed on the roof. As if that'll stop them, a nurse muttered. Emily stood near the trauma board, eyes fixed on the shifting patient list. Her breathing was steady, but her shoulders had gone rigid as if bracing for impact. She had hoped foolishly that whatever this was might pass her by, that the night would end with exhaustion and anonymity intact. Hope, she knew, was a liability. A paramedic burst through the doors, rain-soaked and frantic. Incoming male, late 30s, pulled from a burning vehicle. Hypertensive, altered mental status. We lost his radial pulse en route. Reynolds straightened instantly. Bay A. Move. The patient arrived in pieces, clothes cut away, skin blistered, soot streaked across his face. Burns mottled his arms and neck, but that wasn't what made Emily's stomach drop. It was the pattern of trauma beneath the burns. Blunt force. Shrapnel-like lacerations inconsistent with a civilian crash. A fracture line at the clavicle that suggested downward force like a harness had snapped under load. Emily leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Vitals, Reynolds demanded. BP, 80/40 and falling, a nurse replied. Pulse, thready. Reynolds cursed. We're losing him. Emily stepped forward. He's in hemorrhagic shock, but the burns aren't the primary issue. Reynolds shot her a look. I didn't ask. The bleeding is internal, Emily continued, undeterred. High thoracic cavity, possibly aortic injury. That's a guess, Reynolds snapped. Emily shook her head once. It's a pattern. Reynolds opened his mouth to argue, then the monitor flatlined into a long, shrill scream. Damn it! Start compressions. Hands moved. Orders flew. The room compressed into urgent inches and seconds. Emily was already positioning herself at the patient's side, her voice cutting through the chaos, not loud but unignorable. 2 units. O negative. Now. He needs a resuscitative thoracotomy. The resident froze. That's extreme. Emily looked at him. So is dying. Reynolds stared at her, something like disbelief crossing his face. You're crossing a line. Emily met his gaze. Then stop me. For a heartbeat, the ER seemed to hold still. Then Reynolds swore and nodded. Prep the tray. The thoracotomy was brutal and fast. Blood flooded the cavity, dark and relentless. Emily worked with Reynolds as if they'd trained together for years, anticipating his needs before he spoke, handing instruments with flawless timing. Clamp here, she said. Reynolds followed instinctively. The bleeding slowed. The monitor stuttered, then returned to a fragile rhythm. A life balanced on the edge. When it was over, Reynolds stepped back, chest heaving, hands slick with blood. He stared at Emily like the ground had shifted beneath him. You shouldn't know how to do that, he said quietly. Emily removed her gloves, folding them neatly before disposing of them. I wish that were true. Around them, the ER buzzed with stunned silence. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. Linda arrived moments later, having watched part of the procedure from the doorway. Her face was pale. That wasn't in your scope, she said carefully. Emily nodded. I know. Then why? Because he would have died, Emily replied simply. Linda searched her face for arrogance, for justification. Found none. Just fatigue. And something heavier. Before she could respond, the overhead lights dimmed, then flickered back on. A low murmur rippled through the ER. What the hell was that power surge? No, a security guard said, jogging in. They've requested full helipad clearance. Requested, Linda echoed. The guard swallowed. More like informed. Reynolds looked from the guard to Emily, then back again. Who are they? The guard hesitated. Military. Airframe IDs. Encrypted. The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Emily closed her eyes. It was happening. A voice crackled over the intercom. Admin strained and formal. Attention all staff. Please remain in your assigned areas. Do not access the roof or helipad until further notice. The message ended abruptly, as if cut off mid-sentence. Linda's jaw tightened. That's not how announcements work. The helicopter's sound shifted lower, now closer, the rotors chopping air with a confidence that didn't ask permission. Dust and rain lashed against the windows. The entire building seemed to hum in response. A nurse whispered, "This doesn't feel like a medevac." Emily's hands curled slowly into fists, then relaxed. Reynolds stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "If this has anything to do with you, it does," Emily said. He stared at her. "What? I'm sorry," she added. "For what's about to happen?" Before he could respond, 2 men in dark uniforms appeared at the ER entrance, soaked from the rain. Faces unreadable, posture unmistakably authoritative. They moved with purpose, eyes scanning, ignoring the stares and whispers they left in their wake. One of them stopped at the charge desk. "We're looking for Emily Carter." Every head turned. Linda felt her pulse spike. "You can't just walk in here." The man held up a hand, calm and final. "Ma'am, this isn't a request." His eyes found Emily across the room. They didn't widen. They didn't soften. They simply acknowledged. Emily stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "I'm here." The man nodded once. "Ma'am, we need you upstairs," for what Reynolds demanded, stepping between them. The second man finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "For the trauma specialist we were told was on site." Reynolds laughed, once sharp and disbelieving. "You've got the wrong person. She's a nurse." The first man didn't look at him. His gaze never left Emily. "So we were told," he said. Once, silence fell like a dropped curtain. The helicopter's rotors slowed above them, heavy and inevitable. And in that moment, the ER understood something had just changed forever, though none of them yet knew exactly how deep the reckoning would go. No one moved. The ER, moments ago a place of motion and noise, fell into a stunned stillness that felt almost physical, like the air had thickened, resisting every breath. Rain hammered the windows. The helicopter above slowed its rotation rotors, chopping the night with a measured authority that made the building tremble. Emily Carter stood where she was, shoulders squared, chin level. The two uniformed men faced her with professional calm, neither rushed nor hesitant. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a retrieval. Reynolds broke the silence first. "You can't just take my staff," he said, voice sharp, brittle with disbelief. "We're in the middle of a mass casualty event." The taller of the two men finally glanced at him just long enough to register, dismiss, and move on. "Doctor," he said, "we're aware." "Then you're aware this is insane?" The man's expression didn't change. "No, sir. This is overdue." Linda stepped forward, palms raised. "If you have business here, it goes through administration." "It already did," the second man replied. He tapped the radio clipped to his shoulder once, not looking away from Emily. "They're clearing the helipad." Linda felt her stomach drop. On whose authority? The man hesitated just a fraction of a second. "Federal." The word hit like a gavel. Emily inhaled slowly, then exhaled. She had known this moment would come someday. She had just hoped it wouldn't arrive in the middle of a civilian emergency room under fluorescent lights and judgmental stares. "Give me a minute," she said quietly. The taller man nodded. "You have 90 seconds. Reynolds stared at her. "Emily, what is this?" She met his gaze. For the first time since stepping into Street Anne's, something like regret crossed her face. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm allowed to give." She turned to Linda. "I need someone to cover Bay A." Linda blinked, thrown. "You're what? You're leaving?" "For a moment," Emily said. "Maybe longer." Linda searched her face. "You can't just—" "I know," Emily said gently. "I'm sorry." She moved with purpose, now grabbing her bag from beneath the desk where she'd stashed it earlier. The canvas was worn, the zipper frayed, an object that had followed her through more places than she cared to count. As she slung it over her shoulder, a young nurse stepped forward, voice trembling. "Who are you?" Emily paused. The question hung there raw and honest. "Someone who learned a long time ago," Emily said, "that titles don't always tell the truth." She followed the two men toward the elevators, the ER parting around them like a held breath. No one tried to stop her. The elevator ride was silent. The hum of machinery filled the space between them, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of rotors overhead. "You shouldn't be here," Emily said quietly, staring at the closing doors. "Neither should you," the taller man replied. She almost smiled. When the doors opened onto the rooftop access, the storm hit her like a wall. Wind tore at her scrubs, rain soaking through fabric in seconds. The helicopter crouched on the helipad like awaiting beast lights, cutting harsh cones through the downpour. A crew chief jogged toward them, saluting sharply when he saw Emily. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice over the noise. "Good to see you." Emily nodded. "Wish it were under better circumstances." "We always do," he replied. Down below in the ER, Reynolds stood frozen, watching through the reinforced windows as Emily emerged onto the roof. His mind reeled, replaying every moment he'd dismissed her, every warning he'd ignored. "Trauma specialist," he muttered under his breath. "My God." Linda joined him, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Whatever she is, we misjudged her." Reynolds didn't answer. He couldn't tear his eyes away. On the helipad, Emily climbed into the helicopter without ceremony. Inside, the noise dulled to a low roar. The crew moved efficiently around her, securing straps, checking gear. A man in civilian clothes sat across from her eyes, sharp expression, unreadable. He didn't smile. "You're off the grid," he said. "You know that." "I was promised 5 years," Emily replied. "It's been 3. You were promised time," he corrected. "Not peace." She looked away. "Who's hurt?" The man slid a tablet across to her. Images flashed, injuries, burns, trauma patterns that made her chest tighten. Where she asked. 15 miles east. Secondary blast. Military contractor vehicle. 1 survivor. Critical. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Then she nodded. "Let's go." The helicopter lifted off, rising into the storm rain, sheeting across the windshield as the city lights shrank beneath them. Back in the ER, chaos returned with a vengeance. "Focus," Linda barked, snapping the staff back into motion. "We still have patience." Reynolds moved like a man shaken awake from a dream. He took command, but something had shifted. Every order he gave echoed with a new awareness of how close he'd come to catastrophic mistakes. In Bay A, the patient Emily had helped save stabilized further. Reynolds watched the monitor, then looked toward the ceiling, imagining her above them cutting through the storm. Minutes later, a call came in over the radio. "Incoming military medevac diverted. ETA unknown." Linda stared at the speaker. "Diverted. Why?" The reply crackled with static. "Asset rerouted. Specialist engaged." Reynolds swallowed hard. Hours passed. The storm began to break, thunder rolling farther away, rain easing to a steady drizzle. The ER worked through the backlog of patients' exhaustion, settling in heavy layers. Just after midnight, the doors burst open again. This time it wasn't paramedics. Emily Carter walked back into the ER, soaked hair plastered to her face, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but her posture was unchanged. Behind her, the two uniformed men flanked the doorway, then stopped, allowing her to step forward alone. Every eye turned. Reynolds felt his throat tighten. Is the patient alive?" Emily said. "Barely." The room exhaled as one. She set her bag down, rolling her shoulders once. "I can help here, if you'll have me." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Linda nodded. "Bay B needs you." Emily didn't hesitate. As she walked past Reynolds, he stepped aside, voice low. "I was wrong." Emily met his eyes. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction. "I know," she said. She disappeared into the noise once more, not invisible this time, but unmistakably present. Above them, the helicopter vanished into the clouds, leaving behind a hospital forever altered by the night. It demanded its trauma specialist and found far more than it expected. The ER didn't return to normal after Emily came back. It couldn't. Even as alarms resumed their steady chorus and stretchers rolled in and out, something fundamental had shifted. An invisible line crossed, an illusion shattered. The hierarchy everyone had relied on no longer felt stable. Authority once assumed now felt conditional. Emily moved through Trauma Bay B with quiet efficiency, rainwater still clinging to her scrubs. She didn't announce herself. She didn't explain where she'd been. She simply stepped in where the need was, greatest hands, steady voice, low but precise. "Pressure's dropping again," a nurse said. "Clamp slipped," Emily replied instantly, already fixing it. "He needs fluids warmer than room temp. Hypothermia's setting in." The nurse nodded and moved, no hesitation this time. Reynolds watched from the edge of the bay, unsettled by how naturally people deferred to her now. Not because of rank, not because of fear, but because deep down they trusted her judgment more than anyone else's. That realization stung. Linda stood beside him, arms crossed. "You see it too," she murmured. Reynolds didn't look away. "Yeah." Before either could say more, the overhead doors at the far end of the ER slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The two uniformed men returned. This time they weren't alone. 4 additional figures followed them in dark jackets, no visible insignia boots tracking rainwater across the tile. Their presence changed the air instantly. Conversations died. Monitors seemed suddenly too loud. One of them stepped forward, producing a badge so quickly and smoothly it felt rehearsed. "We need the trauma specialist again," Linda bristled. "You already took her." "Yes, ma'am," the man said evenly. "And now we need her clearance verified in person." Reynolds frowned. "Verified by who?" A voice answered from behind the group. Calm, measured, unmistakably authoritative. "By me." An older man stepped into the light silver hair, cropped short posture, rigid despite the fatigue etched into his face. His civilian coat couldn't hide the bearing beneath it. He didn't need a uniform. Emily looked up the moment she heard him. Her breath caught. The ER seemed to tilt. "Sir," she said quietly. The man's gaze locked onto hers, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "Emily." Every head turned. Reynolds felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You know her." The man didn't look at him. "Yes." "From where?" The man finally faced him. "From places you don't want your patients ending up." He turned back to Emily. "You weren't supposed to be here." Emily held his gaze. "Neither were you." A muscle in his jaw tightened, almost a smile. "Fair point." Linda stepped forward cautiously. "I'm the charge nurse. If this involves one of my staff, I need to understand what's happening." The man studied her for a long moment. "You've done your job well tonight." Linda stiffened. Praise from strangers rarely meant anything good. "She saved lives," the man continued, "including one that carries national implications." A murmur rippled through the ER. Reynolds swallowed. "What exactly are you saying?" The man reached into his coat and produced a thin folder. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "Emily Carter," he said, voice carrying effortlessly. "Formerly Captain Emily Carter, United States Army Medical Corps. Advanced Trauma Field Specialist. Lead medical asset on multiple classified operations." The words hit the room like a shockwave. "Captain, Army, Medical Corps." Reynolds felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not possible." "Her file is intentionally incomplete," the man said. "By design." Emily's eyes never left his. "You said I was done." "I said you were off record," he replied. "Not forgotten." The ER was utterly silent now. Even the monitors seemed to pause as if listening. A nurse whispered. Captain Emily closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the weight she'd been carrying all night finally showed. "I didn't lie," she said softly. "I just didn't tell you everything." Reynolds stepped forward, anger and awe colliding in his chest. "You let us treat you like a nurse," Emily finished. "I was one." "That's not it is," she said firmly. And it mattered. The older man watched the exchange, then spoke again. "There was an incident 3 years ago, a medical extraction under fire. Casualties exceeded projections. Emily made decisions no textbook could justify." Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. "Did people die?" The man didn't hesitate. "Yes." Emily's jaw tightened, and because of her decisions, the man continued. Others lived, including a civilian convoy that would have been wiped out if she'd followed protocol. Linda's voice was barely audible. "Then why did she disappear?" The man's gaze softened slightly. "Because the line between hero and liability is thin." And she crossed it willingly. Emily finally looked away. "You said you'd protect them," she said quietly. "The ones who blamed me." "I did," he replied. "At the cost of your career." She nodded once. "I accepted that." Reynolds felt something crack inside him. He thought of every time he'd dismissed her, every warning he'd brushed aside because of ego, because of titles. "You saved my patients," he said hoarsely. "And I treated you like you were nothing." Emily met his eyes. "You treated me like you thought you were supposed to." The man cleared his throat. "We're not here to reopen wounds. We're here because another extraction is imminent. And we need her." Silence stretched. Emily took a breath. "I just came back from one." "Yes," the man said, "which is why we know you're still the best." The words hung heavy. Linda looked at Emily, eyes shining with something close to pride. "You don't owe us anything." Emily shook her head. "I owe my patients everything." Reynolds swallowed. "If you go, will you come back?" Emily hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? The man watched her closely, saying nothing. Emily looked around the ER, at the nurses who now watched her with respect instead of scorn, at the patients who needed her, at the place she'd chosen to disappear into. "I'll help," she said finally. "One more time." The man nodded. "That's all we ask." As they turned toward the exit, the room parted once more, but this time the silence wasn't judgmental. It was reverent. And Reynolds understood something with painful clarity. They hadn't just mocked a quiet nurse. They had nearly broken a hero who never asked to be seen. The helicopter waited, with its engines idling, a low, predatory hum vibrating through the bones of the hospital roof. Rain had eased into a thin mist, but the night still felt heavy, charged, expectant. Emily stood at the ER doors, her canvas bag at her feet, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She had said, yes. That single word echoed louder in her head than the rotors above. The older man, she still called him Sir in her thoughts, though he'd never insisted, stood a few feet away, speaking quietly into a secure phone. His posture was relaxed, but Emily knew better. He was counting variables, contingencies, outcomes. He always was. Reynolds hovered near the nurse's station, torn between duty and the urge to say something. anything that might change what felt inevitable. Linda caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Not now. Emily knelt to tighten the strap on her bag. Her hands moved with familiar efficiency, but her chest felt tight as if she were bracing against a blow that hadn't landed yet. "You don't have to do this," Linda said softly, stepping closer. Emily looked up, offering a small, apologetic smile. "I know. That's not what I meant," Linda replied. "You don't have to keep paying for something you already survived." Emily's smile faded. "I'm not paying," she said. "I'm choosing." The doors slid open with a hiss. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and fuel. The uniformed men took positions on either side, clearing a path with subtle gestures that didn't ask permission. As Emily stepped forward, a voice cut through the quiet. "Wait." Reynolds stood there, jaw clenched, eyes raw. "If you're going back out there," he said, "I need to know, was I ever right to stop you?" Emily stopped. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. The ER seemed to lean in every breath held. "You weren't wrong to question me," she said. "You were wrong to dismiss me." Reynolds nodded, swallowing hard. "Then, I'm sorry." Emily studied him for a moment longer than necessary. "I believe you." The helicopter lifted a few feet, then settled again as Emily climbed aboard. Inside, the cabin lights glowed dim amber, illuminating faces etched with fatigue and resolve. The crew chief gave her a brief nod and secured the harness across her chest. The door slid shut. The world narrowed to vibration and sound. As the helicopter rose, the city fell away beneath them, wet streets reflecting fractured light, the hospital shrinking into a square of white amid the darkness. Emily felt the familiar tug in her stomach, the sense of leaving one life behind for another that never quite let her go. The man in the civilian coat slid into the seat across from her. He opened the folder this time. "Target is a contractor convoy rerouted during the storm," he said. "Secondary blast. Unknown ordnance. 1 survivor extracted so far. Condition critical." Emily scanned the images. The injuries were severe polytrauma with a pattern that screamed controlled chaos. Not an accident, not random. "This wasn't an ambush," she said. "It was a failure." He inclined his head. "We believe so." She looked up. "You don't bring me in for belief. We bring you in because you see the failure before it finishes, killing everyone," he replied. Emily closed the folder. "Where are we landing? Forward staging site." 10 miles out. She nodded once already, shifting into a different headspace. The quiet nurse was gone. In her place stood someone honed by choices made in seconds that lasted a lifetime. The helicopter descended onto a strip of tarmac slick with rain. Vehicles ringed the site, lights off, silhouettes sharp. Emily stepped out into the cold boots, hitting the ground with a certainty she'd missed and resented in equal measure. They moved fast. The patient lay inside a mobile surgical unit monitors, beeping erratically. He was pale, drenched in sweat, chest rising unevenly. Emily took in the scene in one glance and felt a familiar tightening behind her eyes. "Time since injury?" she asked. 37 minutes, a medic replied. "We stabilized what we could." Emily nodded, already gloving up. "Then we don't have time." She took command without ceremony, voice calm, precise. Orders snapped into place. Hands moved. The room transformed from frantic to focused. As she worked, a detail nagged at her, a subtle asymmetry in the trauma pattern, a rhythm in the bleeding that didn't align. She paused for half a second, then adjusted her approach. "Stop," she said. "There's something else." The medic frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean this injury is masking another," Emily replied. "And if we miss it, he won't make it." She changed course, cutting where instinct and experience guided her. Blood welled. The monitor dipped, then steadied. "There," she said softly. "That's it." Minutes stretched. Then slowly the patient stabilized. A breath Emily hadn't realized she was holding escaped her. The man in the civilian coat watched from the doorway, expression unreadable. When it was over, he stepped closer. "You were right," he said. Again. Emily peeled off her gloves, exhaustion washing over her like a tide. "I usually am." He hesitated. "There's something else." She looked up. "There always is." He lowered his voice. "The incident 3 years ago, the one that took you off record. New information surfaced tonight." Emily's chest tightened. What kind of information? The kind that changes who was responsible. Silence settled between them, heavy and dangerous. "Say it," Emily said. He met her eyes. "You weren't the liability." The words hit harder than any accusation ever had. "Then who was she?" asked voice, barely above a whisper. The man exhaled slowly. "That's what we're about to find out." Outside, the helicopter's rotors spun back to life, a promise and a threat intertwined. Emily looked down at her hand, steady, capable, stained by choices she'd never regretted but always carried. She straightened. "Then take me back," she said. The man nodded. Home. Emily's gaze drifted unbidden to the memory of Street Ann's the ER, lights, the patients, the quiet respect she'd earned the hard way. "Yes," she said finally. "Back there." As the helicopter lifted off once more, Emily didn't look back at the staging site. This time she knew exactly where she was going. And why. Street. Ann's medical center came back into view just after 2:40 a.m. Its lights, cutting a familiar shape against the thinning clouds. The storm had finally loosened its grip on the city, leaving the air damp and quiet, too quiet for what was about to unfold. The helicopter touched down without drama this time. No hovering, no circling, just a controlled descent and the soft thud of landing skids against steel. Emily stepped off the aircraft before the rotors fully slowed, rainwater dripping from her jacket eyes already scanning the rooftop. The night shift security team stiffened instinctively, stepping aside without needing to be told. Word had spread, not through official channels but through something older and faster, human recognition of authority earned under pressure. Inside the ER, exhaustion hung like fog. Linda Morales was at the desk, shoulders slumped, coffee long since gone cold. When she saw Emily walk back in again, she straightened so quickly it almost hurt. "You're back," she said. Emily nodded. "For now." Linda didn't ask questions. She simply turned and called out, "Trauma Bay A needs hands." Emily moved instantly. Inside Bay A, a man lay unconscious, chest rising shallowly beneath oxygen tubing. Blood pressure unstable. Heart rate erratic. The room buzzed with nervous energy, residents whispering, nurses exchanging uncertain glances. Reynolds stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed tight across his chest. He looked up as Emily entered and something unspoken passed between them. "We've done everything we can," he said. "But he's slipping." Emily stepped closer, studying the patient without touching him at first. She listened to the machines, yes, but more to the silences between beeps, the irregular pauses that spoke volumes. "He's compensating," she said quietly. "Barely." Reynolds nodded. "That's what we thought." Emily shook her head. "No. You think he's failing. He's not. He's adapting." She reached for the ultrasound probe, moving with practiced ease. Images flickered onto the screen, layers of shadow and motion that told a story only experience could translate. "There," she said. "See that?" A resident squinted. "I don't microbleed," Emily said. "Hidden. Slow. It won't show up on standard scans until it's too late." Reynolds leaned in, heart pounding. "Can we fix it?" Emily met his gaze. "Yes." "How?" She straightened. "But it won't be clean, and it won't be safe." Reynolds didn't hesitate. "Do it." The procedure was delicate, improvised, bordering on reckless to anyone without the background to understand it. Emily guided the team through each step, her voice steady, unyielding. Hands followed her lead. Tools moved where she indicated. Minutes passed. Then stability. The monitor smoothed. The room exhaled. One of the residents whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." Emily removed her gloves slowly. "You shouldn't have to." As the team dispersed, Reynolds stayed behind. He watched Emily clean her hands, her movements methodical, almost ritualistic. "You were right earlier," he said quietly. "About patterns. About everything." Emily didn't look up. Being right doesn't matter if no one listens. Reynolds swallowed. "I listened tonight." She met his eyes, then something softening just slightly. "That's a start." Before either could say more, the double doors swung open. The older man from earlier, Emily's sir, entered the ER alone this time. No entourage, no badges displayed. His presence was enough. Linda stiffened. "Is there a problem?" He shook his head. "There's a resolution." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "You found it." He nodded. We confirmed the failure. It wasn't medical. It was command. The words landed with quiet violence. Reynolds frowned. Command. The man's eyes flicked to him, assessing. Orders were altered mid-operation 3 years ago. Extraction delayed. Assets redirected. The casualties that followed were preventable. Emily felt the room tilt, not from shock, but from something deeper. Vindication was heavier than she'd imagined. And me, she asked. Why was I blamed because you survived, he said, and because you made the call that exposed the delay? Silence stretched. Linda's voice was barely audible. So she was punished for telling the truth. Yes, the man replied, unofficially. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her expression was unreadable. Then why tell me now? Because the person responsible is no longer protected, he said. And because we need you to testify. The word echoed. Testify. Reynolds felt his chest tighten. That's dangerous. The man nodded. It always is. Emily looked around the ER at the patients, resting more easily at the staff, moving with renewed confidence at the place that had become a refuge without her realizing it. If I do this, she said slowly, I won't be invisible anymore. No, the man agreed. You won't. She considered that. I won't be able to stay here, she added. Linda shook her head fiercely. That's not fair. Emily offered a small smile. It never is. Reynolds stepped forward. If you go public, if you stand up there and say what happened, it changes everything. Emily met his gaze. That's the point. The man glanced at his watch. We don't have long. Media's already circling. Once this breaks, it won't stay contained. Emily inhaled slowly. Then we do it right. She turned to Linda. I need you to cover my patients. Linda nodded, eyes shining. You already taught us how. Emily looked back at Reynolds. You'll keep them honest. Reynolds straightened. I swear it. As Emily followed the man toward the exit, the ER parted again, but this time it wasn't silence that followed her. It was something closer to respect. Outside dawn threatened the horizon, the sky paling just enough to suggest a new day. But Emily knew better. Some reckonings didn't wait for daylight, and the one she was walking toward had been 3 years in the making. Dawn broke slowly over Street Anne's, the sky shifting from slate to pale grey, as if the night itself was reluctant to let go. Emily stood near the ambulance bay, the cold concrete seeping through the soles of her shoes. She hadn't slept. None of them had really. The ER behind her hummed with a different energy now, less frantic, more focused. Like a place that had survived a storm and was taking stock of what remained. The older man, her sir, stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the horizon. He looked older in the daylight. Less myth, more consequence. They'll want you in Washington by noon, he said. Emily nodded. I know. You don't have to answer every question, he added. You can stop at any time. She looked at him. You know I won't. He met her gaze and inclined his head, accepting that truth without argument. Inside the ER, Reynolds watched through the glass as Emily turned away from the rising sun and walked back inside. He felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, not fear this time, but responsibility. All right, he said, clapping his hands once. Let's get back to work. The staff moved immediately. No complaints. No hesitation. In Trauma Bay C, a patient began to crash, oxygen saturation dropping, heart rate spiking. Emily was there in seconds, sliding into place like she'd never left. Bag him, she said calmly. Slow and steady. He's fighting the ventilator. A resident nodded and complied. Reynolds watched her work, absorbing every detail. The way she spoke without raising her voice. The way she paused just long enough to listen to the room, to the patient, to the spaces between numbers. This wasn't authority by rank. This was authority by competence. As the patient stabilized, a nurse leaned toward Reynolds. She's different, she whispered. I mean, really different. Reynolds nodded. Yeah, and we almost lost her because of it. Word spread quickly through the hospital. Not gossip, truth. Quiet, sober truth. Administrators moved more carefully. Department heads spoke in measured tones. The hospital's legal team arrived before sunrise, their expressions grim but attentive. Emily was called into a small conference room just after 8 a.m. The hospital's legal team arrived before sunrise. The man in the civilian coat was already there, along with 2 others she didn't recognize. A recorder sat on the table, red light blinking. Before we begin, one of them said you should know, what you say here will change careers, possibly end them. Emily took a seat. It should. The questions came methodically. Names, dates, orders given and orders changed. She answered without embellishment, without emotion. Facts only. Where she hesitated, it wasn't to protect herself, but to ensure accuracy. At one point, the recorder paused. "Captain Carter," the man said carefully, "do you believe the decisions you made that night were justified?" Emily didn't answer right away. She saw it again, the smoke, the screams, the impossible math of too many wounded and too little time. She felt the weight of choosing who could still be saved. "Yes," she said finally, "and I'd make them again." Silence followed. Then the recorder clicked back on. Outside the room, Linda waited with Reynolds. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. Reynolds shook his head. For the people who hid behind her, very bad. Hours later, the doors opened. Emily emerged, looking drained but lighter, as if a burden had shifted, redistributed where it belonged. The older man followed her, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. "It's done," he said. "The rest will move quickly now." Emily exhaled slowly. "Good." Reynolds stepped forward. "They're saying a press release is coming. Today." She nodded. "I figured. You'll be named," he said. "Officially." "I know." "And Street Anne's." He hesitated. "We want you to stay, if you want." Emily studied his face. The man who had once dismissed her now stood in front of her without defenses, without pride. "I can't," she said gently. "Not after this." Reynolds swallowed. "Because of them, because of me," she replied. "I came here to disappear. I can't pretend that's what I want anymore." Linda stepped closer, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then, where will you go?" Emily smiled, small, genuine. "Where I'm needed, and where I don't have to be silent to belong." Outside, cameras began to gather. Reporters clustered near the entrance, voices rising as they caught sight of uniforms and official vehicles. Emily took one last walk through the ER. Nurses paused to meet her eyes. Residents straightened. One patient reached out weakly and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. She squeezed back. "You're going to be okay." At the doors, she stopped and looked back. The ER looked different now, not because the walls had changed, but because the people inside them had. Reynolds met her gaze and nodded once. Respect. Earned. As Emily stepped into the daylight, microphones lifted, questions shouted. She didn't flinch. She walked forward, steady as ever. Silence had protected her once. Truth would carry her the rest of the way. The press conference didn't feel real. Not at first. Emily stood behind the podium just outside Street. Anne's main entrance, the early morning sun reflecting off camera lenses and polished badges. Microphones clustered like metallic flowers, each one angled toward her mouth, waiting. The crowd of reporters murmured a restless sound layered with the soft whir of recording equipment. She had faced worse environments, places where the air itself seemed hostile, where every second demanded a decision that might haunt her later. But this was different. This was exposure. The older man stood a few steps behind her, just off to the side. He hadn't told her what to say. He never did. Justice, he believed, lost its weight the moment it was coached. A reporter raised her hand. "Captain Carter, can you confirm that you were ordered to delay extraction during the 2023 incident in Kandahar?" Emily looked out over the crowd. She didn't search for friendly faces. She didn't look for Reynolds or Linda, though she knew they were watching from inside. "Yes," she said. "I was." Another voice cut in. "And you disobeyed that order." Emily's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in resolve. "I prioritized the wounded civilians who would have died if I waited." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Did that decision cost lives?" a man shouted. Emily inhaled slowly. "Yes." The word landed hard. "And do you regret it?" She paused. In that pause lived every night she'd replayed the choices. Every name she carried without a grave to visit. Every reason she'd chosen silence over defense. "No," she said. "I regret that the order was given at all." The crowd erupted, questions overlapping, voices rising. The older man stepped forward slightly, a subtle signal to slow the pace. Another reporter spoke up. "Are you saying military command knowingly sacrificed civilians?" Emily met his gaze. "I'm saying decisions were made for reasons that had nothing to do with survival." The words were careful, precise, unavoidable. Inside the hospital, Reynolds watched from a monitor in the staff lounge. The room was full, nurses, residents, even administrators standing shoulder to shoulder. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Linda wiped at her eyes. She's not hiding anymore. Reynolds shook his head slowly. She never was. We just refused to see her. Outside, the questions turned sharper. Captain Carter, why disappear afterward? Emily's voice didn't waver. Because the truth wasn't welcome. And because I was told stepping away would protect the people above me. Did it? No. Silence followed, real silence this time. The kind that pressed in on everyone present. A final question came from the back, quieter than the rest. If you had to do it again, would you? Emily looked past the cameras, past the crowd, to the hospital doors, to the place where she'd been underestimated, where she'd been needed. Yes, she said, every time. The press conference ended without ceremony. No grand statement, no applause. Just the slow realization that something irreversible had been set in motion. Inside, phones began to buzz. Emails flooded inboxes. Names circulated, some rising, others falling with alarming speed. Accountability moved not with noise, but with inevitability. An administrator approached Reynolds, face pale. We've received instructions from the board. Reynolds didn't look at him. Let me guess. Reviews. Resignations. Immediate ones. Reynolds nodded. Good. Linda leaned against the counter, exhausted. You think she knew this would happen? Reynolds smiled faintly. I think she knew it had to. Emily returned inside an hour later, no longer flanked by officials, just herself. The ER paused again as she walked through, this time not in shock but acknowledgement. A nurse stepped forward hesitantly. Captain Emily, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you. Emily considered her for a moment. You treated me how you were taught, she said. Just don't pass it on. The nurse nodded, tears welling. Reynolds approached last. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. They're asking me to head trauma, he said quietly. Interim, maybe permanent. Emily smiled. You'll do fine. Only if I remember this, he replied. All of it. She nodded once. That's how it sticks. They stood there for a moment, the ER humming around them, no longer hostile, no longer dismissive, just human. You're really leaving, Reynolds said. Yes. When? Soon. He hesitated. If you ever want a place here, I know, she said gently. Thank you. Emily walked toward the exit one last time, her canvas bag light on her shoulder. At the doors, she paused, turning back to take in the room, the people, the machines, the quiet understanding that had replaced judgment. Linda called out, voice breaking just slightly. Emily, she turned. You saved more than patience, Linda said. You changed us. Emily's eyes softened. Then it was worth it. Outside, a car waited, not military this time. Civilian. Anonymous. As Emily stepped toward it, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A single message, no sender listed. We're not done yet, but this time you won't stand alone. Emily looked back at the hospital once more. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something unfinished. She was walking toward the final reckoning. The city was fully awake by the time Emily Carter reached the edge of it. Morning traffic crawled along rain-damp streets, horns blaring in irritation, unaware that something fundamental had shifted just miles away. Street. Anne's medical center receded in the rearview mirror, just another hospital to the world. But to Emily it had become a turning point she hadn't planned for and couldn't undo. She sat in the back seat of the unmarked sedan, hands folded loosely in her lap, watching sunlight break through the clouds for the first time in hours. The night was finally over, but the weight of what came next pressed heavier than exhaustion. The driver didn't speak. He hadn't spoken since they pulled away. Emily appreciated that. Silence, when chosen, could still be a refuge. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a secure line. You should know, the voice said calmly when she answered. The board has already suspended 2 senior commanders. More will follow. Emily closed her eyes. Good. There will be hearings. Closed door at first, then public. And the families, she asked. They'll get answers. Official ones. Emily exhaled slowly. That mattered more than titles or vindication ever could. When the call ended, she leaned her head back against the seat and let herself feel it. Not relief exactly, but release. A tension she'd carried for 3 years finally loosened its grip. Back at Street Ann's, the ER settled into a rhythm that felt new. Reynolds stood at the center of Trauma Bay A, issuing instructions with a calm authority he hadn't possessed before. He listened more, questioned himself openly. When a junior nurse spoke up, he paused instead of dismissing her. Linda noticed. So did everyone else. A patient's chart slid across the desk. Reynolds scanned it, then handed it back. "Good catch," he said to the resident. "Let's adjust." The resident blinked, surprised, and then nodded. Emily's absence was felt everywhere, not as a whole, but as an imprint. By afternoon, the official statement hit every major network. Her name appeared in headlines, no embellishment, no mockery this time. Just facts laid bare. Former Army trauma specialist vindicated command decisions under investigation, civilian lives saved against orders. In the staff lounge, a nurse turned off the TV quietly. "We almost lost her," she said. Linda folded her arms. "No, we almost didn't deserve her." Miles away, Emily stepped into a quiet federal building badge clipped to a temporary lanyard. The halls were sterile, echoing stripped of personality. She didn't belong here, not really, but she walked them with the same calm certainty she brought into every trauma bay. A conference room door opened. Inside sat people who had once decided her fate without ever meeting her. Now they stood, not all of them, but enough. She took her seat without ceremony, placing her bag at her feet. The recorder light blinked red again. Captain Carter, a woman across the table, said carefully, "We want to acknowledge the cost of your silence." Emily met her gaze. Silence was cheaper than the truth. "For you." A pause. The woman nodded. "Not anymore." The hours passed in measured exchanges, questions, clarifications, admissions that came too late to undo the past, but not too late to shape the future. When it was over, Emily stepped outside into the afternoon sun. She felt lighter. Not healed, those scars ran deeper than any hearing could reach, but unburdened enough to breathe fully again. Her phone rang once more. This time the number was familiar. "Emily," Linda said, voice warm and tired. "Just wanted you to know. We changed the onboarding protocol." Emily smiled faintly. "What kind of change?" "We listen first now," Linda replied. "Before we assume." Emily closed her eyes. "That's a good start." Reynolds' voice joined in the background. "You'd be proud of them." "I already am," Emily said. When the call ended, Emily stood there for a long moment, letting the city noise wash over her sirens, footsteps, life continuing in imperfect motion. She didn't know exactly where she would land next. A different hospital, a training role, maybe somewhere quieter, maybe somewhere just as chaotic. But for the first time, she would arrive as herself. Not hidden, not dismissed, not silent. Back at Street. Anne's a new nurse walked into the ER for her first shift, nervous, quiet, trying not to take up too much space. A senior nurse smiled at her and said, "Hey, you don't have to rush. We'll figure it out together." The nurse nodded, relief flickering across her face. Somewhere without meaning to, Emily Carter had changed the outcome for people she would never meet. And that more than medals, more than rank, more than vindication was the justice she'd never known she was waiting for. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, especially in places ruled by ego and hierarchy. But true strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself under pressure when the cost of being right is personal and the risk of speaking up is real. Emily Carter was underestimated because she didn't demand attention. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself when it would have been easier to explain. Instead, she chose competence over recognition, action over approval, and truth over comfort. The lesson is simple but not easy. Listen before you judge. Respect before you rank. Because the quietest person in the room may be carrying the heaviest responsibility, and when the moment comes, they might be the one who saves everything. If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe.